Chapter 10. Not Easily Frightened. The moon shone down on the Hotel Splendide, where the Pot family, Commander Caractacus Pot, Mimsy, and the twins, Jeremy and Jemima, lay fast asleep after their terrific adventures of the last 24 hours. In the hotel garage, Chitty Bang Bang was also dozing comfortably as her engine and crankshaft and brake linings cooled off after her exciting dash across the channel to France. When Joe the monster had seen the lights go out in the hotel and had noticed from the shadows on the blinds that Commander Pot and Mimsy were sleeping in one room, with Jeremy and Jemima in another room next door, he and his ruffians swiftly got to work. From the boot of the car, they took out a number of burglarious instruments, a telescopic aluminum ladder for climbing the wall of the hotel, a jemmy. This is a burglar's tool for opening windows and doors. It looks rather like a powerful tin opener, and some rope. Joe the monster whispered a series of commands, and in a trice the gang had run the ladder up the hotel wall to the room where Jeremy and Jemima lay fast asleep. And then, while Man Mountain Fink, who was as strong and as big as he sounds, held the foot of the ladder, Soapy Sam, who was a very tiny man but a very strong one, crept softly up the ladder, and after some quick work with the jemmy, slipped over the windowsill and into the room where the twins lay sleeping. He had his orders. He went first to Jemima's bed, whirled up the four corners of the sheet on which she was lying, and with her bundled up inside of it, tied a knot out of the four corners so as to make her look like a bundle of washing. And almost before she could awake, handed her softly out the window and into the arms of Mountain Man Fink. Jeremy had stirred in his sleep, but here again it was only needed a quick few moments, and he too was on his way out the window, and then their clothes and shoes were hurled pell-mell after them. But of course the children were quickly awake, and even before they could be bundled into the back of the black car, had started to struggle and squeak. But, alas, it was not loud enough. Mimsy woke and said sleepily to Commander Pot, "Did you hear that squeaking? It sounded sort of muffled. I suppose it mustn't be the children." But Commander Pot only gave a sleepy grunt and said, "I expect it was bats or mice," and then went firmly off to sleep again, and neither of them paid any attention to the sound of the black car starting up and softly driving away. Fortunately, Chitty Bang Bang had smelt trouble. Heaven knows how, but there it is. There was much about this magical car that even Commander Pot couldn't understand. All I can say is that as the gangster's low black roadster stole away down the moonlit streets, perhaps its movement jolted something or made some electrical connection in the mysterious insides of Chitty Bang Bang. But anyway, there was a tiny soft whir of machinery, hardly louder than the buzz of a mosquito, and behind the ornament on the bonnet, like a small antenna, like a wireless aerial, rose softly, and the small oval bit of mesh wire in miniature, rather like you see on the top of those big radar towers at the airports, began to swivel until it was pointed directly after the gangster's car, which was now hurtling up the great main road toward Paris. And all through the night, while Commander Pot and the children and Mimsy were asleep, and while the twins were being bumped about in the back of the gangster's car, Chitty Bang Bang's radar eye was following every twist and turn of Joe the monster, hunched over the wheel of his black tourer. Now, Joe the monster was, in fact, head of an international gang of robbers and ruffians, and he was known in France as Joe le Monstre. I hope this isn't the first French word you've learned. And while things got too hot for him in England, he moved his gang over to France, and vice versa. As soon as they got out of the town of Calais, he ordered the knots at the top of the sheet bundles which contained Jeremy and Jemima to be undone by Soapy Sam and Blood Money Banks, between whom the twins were wedged in the back seat. Although he was a monster in the eyes of the law, neither he nor his gang of crooks were so monstrous as to want Jeremy and Jemima to suffocate. Now the two children were too startled to really know what was happening to them. They both knew it wasn't something good, but being the children of rather adventurous parents, they weren't easily frightened. Joe the monster leaned back from the wheel and said over his shoulder in a voice that was meant to be sugary, "Now then, duckies, everything's quite all right. Your dear Pa and Ma have asked us to take you for a little night drive to see something of the French countryside by moonlight." He turned to Man Mountain Fink, who sat beside them. "Ain't that right, Man Mountain?" 100% right, and cross my heart and wish to die," said the big man, all in one breath. "You hear that, my duckies?" called Joe the monster above the rushing wind. "You're in good hands. The very best. You just go off to bye-byes, and when you wakey, there'll be a delicious brekkie waiting for you." Now, if there's one thing the twins and most other children of their age hate, it is being talked to in baby language. Certainly, as far as Jeremy was concerned, he would prefer that Joe the monster rather than he would prefer Certainly, as far as Jeremy was concerned, he would prefer Joe to be monstrous rather than niminy-piminy. At least you know where you are with grown-ups who behave like grown-ups, but no child likes a grown-up to talk like a baby. But to tell the truth, both Jeremy and Jemima were too sleepy from the previous day's adventures to care very much what was happening to them. So they snuggled up together, and Jemima was soon fast asleep. But before Jeremy dozed off, he heard snatches of conversation between Joe the monster and Man Mountain Fink drifting from the back of the front seat. And the snatches of the conversation were something like this: "Just what we want for the bonbon job. Innocent pair of monkeys. Shove 'em in just before closing. 5,000 francs. Keys of the safe are in the till. When the old geezer goes for the change, and then Soapy can use the jelly." Trying to make heads or tails out of these mysterious sentences, Jerry snuggled up beside Jemima, and lulled by the speed of the car and the rush of the wind, and knowing, as children always do, that their father and mother would soon rescue them, he too fell asleep. It had been 3 o'clock in the morning when the children had been kidnapped from the Hotel Splendide, and it was 8 o'clock when the gangsters' car drew up outside the deserted warehouse owned by Joe the Monster in the suburbs of Paris, over 150 miles from Calais. It was precisely at this moment, when the gangsters were carrying the bundled up children into the building, that the miniature radar on the bonnet of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang held steady, as if she knew that this was the end of their journey. And then, perhaps because of some short circuit, or perhaps for some other reason quite beyond my understanding, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang's powerful klaxon began to go gagooga, 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 and just went on doing it, making the most horrendous din you could ever imagine. Well, Commander Pot and Mimsy were instantly awake, and with, I'm sorry to say, a very powerful swear word. It was dash my wig and whiskers, if you want to know. Commander Pot leapt up out of his bed, pulled on some clothes, and dashed downstairs and round to the garage to find what the electrical fault was and stop it before the whole population of Calais, led by the police and the fire brigade, charging round to find out who was responsible for the horrendous din. You can imagine his astonishment when directly he tore open the garage doors and stood to face Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And there was one last googa, and then silence. "Now what the devil's the matter with you?" said Commander Pot, As if in reply, the giant headlights suddenly blazed on and off in one gigantic wink of warning. Commander Pot was even more puzzled. "There must be something terribly wrong with your electrical system," he said sympathetically. "Let's just see what the matter is." And he went to open the bonnet, but then, for the first time, caught sight of the little, thin antenna sticking up in front of the windshield and stopped in his tracks. "What in heaven's name?" He had just begun when Mimsy came dashing across from the hotel. "The children!" she cried desperately. "They're gone! And their clothes, too! There are marks of a ladder on the windowsill. Someone's been at the window breaking in. They've been kidnapped, I know it, by those awful men we ran into yesterday. For heaven's sake, Jack!" Which she always used as a short for Caractacus. "What are we going to do?" Commander Pot didn't argue or say, "Are you sure?" Or even, "How do you know?" Or even go to see the evidence for himself. He knew that Jeremy and Jemima would never have left the hotel of their own accord, and certainly not, he had realistically to himself, without having had any breakfast. He looked down from the tearful Mimsy. He looked at the tearful Mimsy and to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and suddenly he knew, he absolutely knew for sure, that the meaning of the radar device, and that the magical car had sounded her own horn, both to wake them up and because she knew where the twins had gone. "Here, darling," he said urgently. "Here's some money. Be a good girl and run over and get the rest of my clothes and pay the bill. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang knows where they've gone. Don't ask me how, but I know it for sure, and we'll get after them." As Mimsy ran off, glad to have something to take her mind away from the fears, Commander Pot jumped into the driving seat and pressed the self-starter. And at once the great car, with her usual chitty chitty bang bang, leapt into life. And Commander Pot steered her out and across the street just as Mimsy came running out of the hotel. She jumped in beside him, and they were off, slowly at first, so Commander Pot could watch the little radar scanner on the bonnet just in front of him. At first it pointed left down the main street, and then it corrected itself like a compass when it had got to the right course, and then at the big turning towards Paris, it swiveled to the right, and Commander Pot obediently whirled the wheel, and they were off to the huge main road that said, "To Paris."